the same on an ATV or side-by-side. Maverick is a little bit bigger and longer. Basically, you're going to remove these 13 8mm bolts. They're all around the perimeter of the clutch. Once those things are out, we will have access to the primary clutch. Now, a more difficult part of this process in getting the cover off is getting these bolts underneath out. This is pretty much what it looks like under here. You have to take the center skid plate down on the UTV to achieve this. Alright, once you're down to your clutches and your cover is off, we're going to use a spreader bolt. This is going to come in the clutch kit. You're just going to stick this thing in the secondary clutch and thread it in there. You have an air tool that helps a little better. And just tighten it in there. Do not over tighten it. Once it's in there and the belt is sufficiently loose, you'll see that the belt can easily be taken off the secondary, off the primary, and it's off. That's all it takes for step 2. Now we're up on step 3. We're going to take the spreader bolt back out. Take that back out, just hit reverse, and that'll close the sheath back up. Do this with one hand. To prevent the secondary from rotating, it also helps if you put it in gear. Just put the transmission in high, low, reverse, and that'll lock it. This way it won't spin away on you. Now we're up on step 4. We're going to take the primary bolt, the center bolt, which is 19mm or 3/4 inch, and then there's a secondary, which is 17mm. Both are left-hand thread to both are left to remove it. So air tools also help doing this. This way you don't have to hold or brace the clutch. Clutch will pop off just like that. Pick it right off of the shaft, and you'll see the spring behind it. Both of them come as one piece. Grab this here. Now we're on the secondary. You swap that socket out on your air gun to a 17mm. Now the secondary comes off under spring pressure, so watch so it doesn't fly off on your lap and damage the secondary, because we're going to reuse this. Just be very careful when you're taking that off of there. Now once you got your primary and secondary off of there, it's a little task to get it off and around the exhaust. You have to do a little wiggling. There we go. You take the outside sheave off of the primary first. Secondary off. You'll slide that spring out. And now we're going to take that rod and that helix off as well. That rod will slide right out, and then the helix will just come right off of the back, and then we're done. Here's our next step. This is a clutch puller tool. I use a Kawasaki T-Rex clutch puller tool. This is available from Kawasaki. You can buy it from EPI, any kind of aftermarket provider. Just don't buy a cheap one made on Amazon. They will bend in there. They're a lot more stout than a Can-Am clutch puller. You're basically going to thread that in there, and the head of the puller is a 19mm, so put that on your air gun. It also helps to have an air gun ready for this. Makes pulling the clutch off a hell of a lot easier. And then in there you'll see the one-way bearing, everything like that. that, and you'll see the black marks on the primary. That's where the factory clutch squeals and slips all the time. So basically this is going to be a right-hand turn, so tighten it, right-hand, and clutch pops off, and that's all it takes. You pick everything right off of there, and now our primary and secondary clutches are removed from the machine. Now for our next step, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the hose clamps from here. We have these are 7mm head, or you can use a Phillips or a flathead screwdriver, whatever you prefer. I like to use sockets. Just makes it a little easier. So remove this one here and this one here. This is the front CVT intake, and we have two on the back. These are the CVT exhaust. One here, one here. Just helps remove both of them. And then what we're going to do is, pretty sure these are 10mm. You have a 10? I'm more than certain that's what these things are. Yep, these are all 10mm right in here. So 10mm, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 on the primary, and then we have 4 on the secondary, and then 1 brace on the bottom. So in total, we have 9 10mm bolts to remove and 4 hose clamps, 2 in the front, 2 on the back. Now once we have all the bolts out for we have the clamps on the front, we had 4 10mm bolts on the front, and we had 4 bolts on the back, and then 1 washer and nut, and then the rear exhaust CVT clamp right there, and this exposes our crankshaft and our secondary clutch. Now what we're going to do, in order to fit this clutch on there, this comes with a billet spacer. This is a 1/4 inch thick, and basically what this is going to do is this is going to bolt right on here and sandwich in between the primary and the motor and the crankshaft, and it's going to space the primary out a 1/4 inch. And you'll see there's a little notch in the bottom. We got 4 holes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this other hole right here is for the notch. You'll see in the factory cover there's a little piece right here, and what this does is, once we put this on the cover, now there's an O-ring on the inside here. We're going to make sure the O-ring sits, and the O-ring goes on the flat part. This way our new O-ring seal is going to be on the top, and I highly suggest that you use something like a Permatex Ultra Gray or Ultra Black and liberally seal these things up. So make sure this clutch cover is really clean, and you want to Ultra Gray and sealant on this surface right here, and then you'll see how there's a little plastic tab right here. What you want that tab to do is sit inside that, and this is going to be a billet spacer. Now this step is only necessary on ATVs and Commanders. The Maverick will not need this done to it because the Maverick already has a larger clutch cover. So if you have a Maverick, you can just omit this step and wonder why the kit's not in there, because it's not needed with your setup. And that's about all it takes. So O-ring on the bottom, seal it, O-ring on the top, and you're going to seal this as well once we put it back on there. And there's your secondary. I also suggest sealing this. This is a big problem with Can-Ams, and they can get water that leaks in through the back of this cover, and you'll get water in on your clutches. So that's all it is. Off to the next step. This is what we're going to use for sealant. This really works good. Permatex Ultra Gray. So basically what we're going to seal on this is we're going to seal this O-ring, and you might want to put a little bit around every one of these bolt holes on here to prevent water or anything from entering the clutch cover. Water will kill the clutch or any clutch system. So Permatex Ultra Gray, that's what to use, and we're going to seal this up now. And there's after the sealant's installed. You just want to get it around there. It's a good idea to do all the bolt holes too, because that just eliminates any chance of anything leaking in there. It's really all it takes. Now here is a, this is the billet spacer. This is the O-ring facing upward. This is going to go in and contact the motor first. So you'll see how we put the sealant on there as well. Right here is the bolt on the left, which was removed from the factory. In the kit you're going to have 4 of these bolts right here, which are larger. These are 10 by 1.25s. With that spacer plate on the primary, you're going to get 4 longer bolts. These bolts are going to be the ones that bolt onto this primary right in that plate there. So you're going to see how that installs in a minute. Now that we got the spacer plate in, the 4 longer bolts are going to go right here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. All the factory bolts, 10mm head, will be right here in the back. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 bolts and 1 washer and lock nut. And then if we can look in behind here, you will see the spacer stuck in between the motor and the sealant in there, so we know everything is good. Don't forget, tighten your hose clamps up here. You got your 2 on the front, and then we have your 2 hose clamps on the back. And once you're back on this step, we are ready for installation of the primary and secondary clutch. That's all it takes. Now there's one very important note. When you're this crankshaft here, when you're reinstalling the new primary clutch, do not put grease, anti-seize, oil, or even greasy fingerprints on this crankshaft. This thing right here, this has to stay extremely clean and dry for the installation. That's all it takes. When we do the reinstallation here, we're going to put the secondary shaft on. It's important to put a small amount of anti-seize on here. Do not put a liberal amount on. This is the secondary shaft. This is also for a stock secondary, so if you're using something like an STM, you won't have to do this. So that stock shaft goes on there. Just put a little anti-seize on and wiggle it around. Don't forget to put the helix on. Helix has to go on first. Now on these newer models, it's going to get a little hard to see here. You're going to see the hole in the helix, which is right down there in the bottom. I don't know if you can see my finger point to it. This is for the torsional spring. It's very important that you put the spring in that hole correctly. Earlier models, they will not require it. Any ATV or Commander, newer ones, the Maverick doesn't have that issue. So basically, we're going to slide this shaft off. And we put the helix on. Now, easy way to do it is stick that right on there. Oh, there goes my light. I'm going to stick the shaft back on there, and this will show us. It's a little dark in here with the roof on, so that'll show us how everything gets loaded and stuck back on there. That's for reinstallation of the secondary clutch. Now here's the secondary bolt. I highly suggest that you purchase a new secondary bolt for this, or if you're going to reuse your old one, what I suggest is red Loctite. You must red Loctite this secondary on. These are prone to bolt coming loose and the secondary falling off and crashing into the primary. So when you're putting it on, red Loctite. Got to be on there. On reinstallation of the secondary, you're going to see the torsional spring wants to really push this out. So you're going to need some real strong hands and an extra hand here to help. So you're going to push this secondary in extremely hard, have somebody ready to get that center bolt back in there. So it's going to take your hands, and you can actually grab onto this inner plastic shield and squeeze it on there and make sure that's all lined up. On the secondary clutch, you also want to make sure that the inside in there, it's very hard to see, your helix doesn't hit the inside. So we're a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but what we need to do, once we have everything back on here, the primary and everything is all going to be reattached, and I install the secondary clutch. Make sure that your secondary has the movement in there, and then put that bolt in here. That ensures that your secondary will be spread open, and just make sure that you got that spread open, and now we're ready for primary installation. Now we're ready to bolt back on the primary. There's a new primary clutch, and this thing just basically slips right on the crankshaft here. And once it's on there, just give it a little spin, make sure it's seated correctly. And there's the new primary bolt. You're going to use the bolt that's supplied in the kit. Make sure you have the bolt. There's going to be an aluminum spacer and a circular lock washer here. You're going to stick that thing in the center there. And this is a 10mm Allen head socket. So once you put this on there, follow the recommended torque specs and tighten that thing down properly. Now once that primary bolt is attached in there, everything is locked on and you're ready to go. Now, installation of the belt, I recommend OEM belt. This is a Maverick belt. There's the part number. And you're going to see the rotation. Make sure the rotation faces the front of the motor. Now we already spread the secondary with the spreader bolt in the last step. So you put the belt around the primary. And we got to work the belt right around the secondary. Do it with one hand, it's a little tough. And once the belt is around there, now all we're going to do is remove this bolt right here. That's the spreader bolt, and you're ready to go. Now you see we removed the spreader bolt from the secondary, but our belt is loose. So what do we do about that? All you do is put the machine in neutral at this point and simply turn the clutches, turn it backwards, turn it forwards, anyway, and you're going to see the belt will ride all the way up and sit out of the secondary now. So we got maximum underdrive on the secondary, and that belt is sitting way down there on the primary. So once we've achieved that, you have successfully installed both of these clutches, and we're ready to put the cover back on and button it up. Now before you reinstall everything, it's a real good idea just to start it up and make sure that everything is installed and functioning correctly. You can see the primary spinning, it's locked, it's very quiet compared to the stock unit. And just make sure your vehicle is in park or neutral at this point when you do it. Now once the clutches are done, basically bolt that cover back on there, and the key element is not to over tighten these little 8mm bolts. These things are very easy to strip the inside plastic out, so I highly recommend, if you're going to use an air tool, this is not the step to do it on. Tighten these things up by hand.